This is Ariane from Sociable Art. Today we're painting Blue Ridge Parkway scene, and I got this image, well, I took the picture when I was on the parkway and I just saw this beautiful scene and I wanted to share it. So I have sketched on the design, the basic design elements onto my canvas, and I actually started painting the sky and the mountain, but I'll go over that with you. And I have at the bottom of the screen all of the colors that we're going to be using today. And also at the bottom of the screen you can see where you can order a pre-sketched canvas from sociableart.com or a printed 9x12 canvas sheet, which makes it all that much easier because it has the basic design on there. So I already started the sky and I used this cerulean blue, and you can start with a medium brush maybe and then switch to the bigger brush to get the bigger brush strokes up in the sky. The one important thing about doing this sky here is that I started with a lighter shade of cerulean blue down here, and then as I moved up into the sky area I darkened my shade. So you start with white added to cerulean blue, and we'll add the clouds later so you don't have to worry about that. Add a little water to your paint if you find that you're kind of spare with your paint and you end up with canvas showing through, then adding some water will help you to correct that. It'll fill in the grooves in the canvas better and you won't be able to see those little areas of canvas showing through, or else just try to use a little more paint if you could. So as we go up higher into the sky, then we're going to add a slightly darker shade of the cerulean blue. So just add more of the blue to your mix as you get up towards the top of the sky. And the way that I'm doing my, sorry about that for shaking the camera. The way that I'm doing my brush strokes today is that I'm doing kind of a slow sort of back and forth motion like this with little X's, and that helps my paint shades to blend. I don't like to use just one solid color. I sometimes like to add a little bit of white into my shade, and this will help it to mix by doing these little back and forth little brush strokes. So I'm adding a little white into here, and then I can just do these little brush strokes and it'll blend in. And that helps that darker shade to blend in up at the top as well. So you can just continue to fill your sky using that technique, and as you get towards the top, just darkening your shade. And then we'll move on to these, to the mountains down below, and we're going to be adding some ultramarine blue and white, and you can mix a little bit of that. And I'm just gonna pause it while you finish filling in your sky. Okay, now that you have your sky filled in, now we can work on the mountains. We'll go back and add clouds into the sky in a little bit. So right now for the mountains, I'm going to use the ultramarine with white added, and if you want them to be even a little bit more of a purple shade, you could add a little purple to that as well. And the key is that you want to have them get a little bit lighter as they, darker as we move down and have these mountains that are closer to us. They are going to be the darkest, and these ones that are far off are kind of hard to see. They're kind of fading into the sky, into the atmosphere, so they're going to be a lighter shade. And also each ridge that we do, we want to fade into a very light shade before the next ridge starts, because it's supposed to look like there's a mist or fog rising up from the valleys between the mountains. So I'm starting with this slightly, a light shade of ultramarine mixed with white, and then I'm going to get it to be even lighter as I move down towards the next ridge. So as I get to about this area on this ridge, I'm going to start adding more of the white. And this one almost looks just a little too dark in comparison, so I could lighten that up. No part of your painting has to be finished until you decide it is. You can always go back and add more colors into an area. You can add, like I can add some, like a ridge line here with a lighter shade. Just you can keep on, I mean, it matters just how much time you want to spend on it. So you could just keep adding detail, more shades. It's just up to you how you want these mountains to look. So now that I've filled in that one, I can always go back and add to it, but for right now that's probably good enough. I can go on to the next mountain, which will be slightly darker than the one before it. So this ridge will be slightly darker. So I've got the color I started out with, and I'll just add more ultramarine to it, and I'll continue to do that on down till I get to this last ridge right here, which will have a little green in it because it's going to have a little bit of grass on it. And I'm just going to fast frame through the rest of these mountains, and then I'll join you again. Okay, now I'm going to add the last ridge line, which has just a little bit of green added to it. So I have the ultramarine blue and some white added to it, but I also have just a touch of the hooker's green in it. It's kind of hard to tell, but that's what's made this each different shade. I mean, I think you could make it a little bit more green, so I'm adding just a little more green to it. A little more white. Yeah, that's more like it. So hooker's green, ultramarine blue, and white. And this little ridge is also going to fade into a fog. So we'll start out with this shade, but we will quickly change it to white. And I don't know, I'm sure you've noticed this while you were doing the mountains up above. But it's easier to get the colors to blend, like the white to blend into this shade, if everything's still wet. So number one, you have to use enough paint that it will stay wet. And number two, you want to move to the next shade pretty quickly, or else you'll just need to re-wet that paint again so that it will blend. So down here we're gonna have white. And really, if I were doing this painting to sell or something, if I really wanted it to be a lasting memory, not just maybe a practice piece, I would go back and do a couple different, do layers of color on top of those mountains, and not just, you know, leave it with the one coat of color. But I'm thinking of this more as we're just trying to get our bearings, trying to figure out how to do mountains and clouds, and so it's just kind of a first attempt at it, and you get better as you practice. Whoops, too much water. Paper towel handy. If you have too much water with this acrylic paint, it'll start to really be problematic. It'll start to lift color off of the canvas, which is not something you want. Add the white down here. I mentioned, I'm sure, in one of my earlier videos, but you might not have seen that one, so I wanted to say again that the quality, I mean, you can use any kind of acrylic paints to paint this. And what I use most of the time, because it's what I would use in my classes, in my sociable art classes, when we still could have sociable art classes, I would use like a student grade acrylic, and that's fine. But I urge you to at some point try, you know, give yourself a chance to try a nicer grade of acrylics, and you'll see quite a difference in how they work and the color and the pigment. Okay, so I've got that one in. Now we're gonna start adding the color into these hillsides. And What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have some base colors and then I'll add a little more definition. So off in the distance here, these hills will also fade. So they'll fade into a fog too. And I'm going to use kind of a yellow ochre or yellow oxide color with some white added to it. That's more color than I want. I really want more white than that. Okay, so more white added to it. I'm using the big brush, but you can use the medium brush if you're more comfortable with that. And I'm just going to do this white with the yellow oxide or the ochre. I really don't want too much of that color, so I'm gonna wipe some of that off. Always keep that paper towel handy. It's like an eraser sometimes for me. Okay, I'm running this up on the ridgeline, and then as I move down, after I get this area filled in up here on the ridgeline, then I want to pull my brush strokes kind of down towards the viewer like this and follow the road. And as we get down towards the bottom of the canvas, we're gonna start adding green. And I don't wanna add the green straight though, it's the hooker's green. I want to add white to it and that yellow ochre shade. I'm just gonna lift this up so I can get the bottom here. And this is just, you know, #1 coat of paint, so. And here's where the yellow ochre shade and the green shade blend together. Here's where I might switch to the medium brush. And then I can do a little bit of those, bit of Xing back and forth strokes. And the problem is I've run out of white paint. I really need more white paint. And this is eventually going to be quite yellow up here, but I just want to lay in some base coats of color, and then I'll work on top of those. So I'm just doing those little X strokes all over this area. And this, I don't want this line along the road. If you were to leave it as just like a line, you will see that. It'll dry that way. And this, even though in my picture this probably actually was a paved road, I'm gonna make it kind of a dirt road here, so I don't want it to be perfect, have perfect lines on either side. So I just kind of roughed that up a little. Okay, and I'm gonna pause this and go fast forward and just fill in the other side in the same manner. Okay, now that we've got the field basically filled in, now we're going to add some clouds and some trees. So I thought I better do that in a slower speed so that you can see how to do that. So for the clouds up in the sky, I'm going to use my medium brush, And you can use a square edge or angled edge. I like to use that to, and some people might prefer a round brush. You kind of will find your own way of doing clouds. I like to use the corner of my brush and kind of work up the edges of the cloud and then fill in the whole base of it. And a great suggestion, I think, is to go out and look up at the sky and look at the clouds, and you will see all different kinds of clouds. You could even just sit there and look out your window and see what kind of clouds are floating by right now. And so many different ways to do it in kinds of clouds that you can hardly go wrong. So mine are kind of going to be fair weather, I think, today, because that's what I'm looking up and seeing outside in my sky today. So I'm just going to kind of do the corner of my brush, very random little, what I do is these little circling motions with my brush, and I don't use a lot of paint. If you use a lot of paint, you're going to end up with huge puffy clouds, which there are often those kind of clouds in the sky, but they look a little bit amateurish when you're doing them in a painting like this. So maybe try not to do total cotton ball clouds. So I work up the edges and then I'll fill in the centers. And you can add a little bit of gray into these clouds too if you want to make them look a little more three-dimensional. And you could have some clouds overlapping others, because that certainly does happen in the sky. So you can add either a little you could even add a little the ultramarine into the cloud, or a little gray. I'm trying to get a little gray going here. I'm mixing it in my palette. So you can add just a nice light shade of gray, or maybe add a little bit of the ultramarine to it. Put that on the bottom of your cloud. Maybe the bottom of your clouds is being wisped away by a wind. So maybe the bottom is flattened out, like that. So this cloud that I'm doing here is going to be on top of the one in front of it. And it'll be easier to do once this other one is dry, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to go right ahead and put it over top. And you can have some clouds that are sitting just directly right on top of the mountain too. Like they sitting right there, coming over the top of the mountain. Now I didn't mean to, but I got a little bit of the yellow into this cloud, and I kind of like it. Like maybe the sun is just rising and there's still a little bit of yellow in there. So I am not going to cover it. I'm going to put some of it actually in this cloud as well, like I did it on purpose. Sometimes it's the happy accidents that make things really look good and natural. So I think you kind of get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of my clouds, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, so I've added a few more clouds, and I'm sorry, I completely forgot to record adding those few clouds in fast frame. But now I'm going to add the trees that are here on the top of the hillside, and I'm going to use a medium brush with a square edge. And again, I'm using kind of the corner. I'm going to have to use a smaller. Or you can use a smaller brush with a round edge, but you're just going to be using the corner of the brush to get this like kind of a look like a pine tree. So I have a hooker's green, but I want to add some blue to it. So I'm going to add some of the ultramarine to it and make a blue-green. And I might need to just, let's see if I need to lighten it up. Maybe just a touch of white added to it. So a blue-green with a little white added to it. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to start on this side and just add, I'll start at the tip of one of my trees and I'll work up just that little point at the top. And this green is looking too green to me, too bright. So I'm going to add just a pinch of black to it so it's not, I don't want it to be very bright. I don't want to stand out terribly well on the hillside. So I added a little black to my green, my blue-green. Go back to it. So I worked up a little top to it, and then I'm going to work from the center out into branches. And if it feels more comfortable to you to use a medium brush to do this, a real thin, like a liner brush, you can do that. One thing I don't want to do, which I do have a tendency to do like everybody does, is I don't want to make it such a perfect pattern that it looks like someone planted Christmas trees that were perfectly trimmed on the top of this hillside. Though it could be a Christmas tree farm. But there should be probably something a little bit irregular about your tree. And then I'll do one next to it. Don't want it exactly the same size. They can overlap a little bit. We don't want perfection. And then maybe some smaller kind of shrubbery. I don't know exactly what we got growing here. Maybe some small trees or some bushes. It's your little world. You can put whatever you want growing there. Maybe just a hedgerow. And then one more tree right here on the edge. And then I'm going to show you how we'll transition this area into our field. Okay, and then when we get down to the field, I have a little bit of paint left on my brush. I'm going to add a little water to it. And then I'm going to do some horizontal, kind of zigzagging strokes, just to have, what I say is it's planting the trees into the ground. It's just making them more look like they're a part of this foreground and they're not just, stuck on there. Okay, so I'm going to do that same thing on the other side, so I'll fast forward through that part. I just wanted to tell you one thing I just added, I didn't want to forget to tell you that I did, is I took some of that green that I was using for these trees, and I had just a little bit on my brush, added a little water to it, and added just a little bit of an idea of some greenish ridges here, because I thought that color should be someplace else up here too. So now I'm going to add the other trees, but I just wanted to show you that real quick. Now I'm gonna add the road in the center, and I want mine to be like a dirt road. So I needed to create a shade of brown from the colors in the palette. And you know, well, you might not know, but you might have found out by accident at some point that to create brown, it's kind of like adding all the colors in your palette together and it will accidentally make brown. But so what I used was the yellow ochre or yellow oxide, green and red. So yellow, green, red, and then I added white to it. And I'm putting this color on. Mine's kind of a tan color. I want it to fade into white up here. So this is definitely going to turn into white up at the top. And then as we come down, it'll get a little bit darker down here at the bottom. And I'm gonna add a darker shade of brown too, like there's kind of ruts in the road. And I want it to look like the grass is encroaching on the road, but I'll add more of that in a bit. I don't want to add that yet. Okay, and this is going to fade into the white up at the top. And then I do want to use some of the darker shade of brown I created from those colors that I told you about. I used yellow and red and green, and I got this color brown that's a little bit darker. And I'm just gonna kind of put the idea of some ruts in the road where the tires went through. The tires had a tendency to go in the same ruts. So there's two sets of tire tracks or ruts in the road. I'm gonna get my brush just a little damp. Kind of blend that in a little more naturally. And if something doesn't look right to you, you can always go back to the color that you were using prior, which on the road was this tan shade. Just add a little of that back in. Okay, just roughing up that surface a little bit with some other shades, different shades of brown, so it's not like a paved surface. Well, you could work on that a little longer if you want to, but I want to move on to the next part. So now we're going to work on this field a little bit more, and we need to make it look like the flowers are in there. So we're going to have a brighter yellow background area. Okay, so on top of this field, we're going to have a nice bright lemony yellow color. And you can see I'm sort of dabbing on. I have a medium yellow here, and I really wish that I had a brighter, lighter yellow. I mixed white with my color to make it a lighter shade, but if you have a nice bright yellow, I would use that. So back here, off in the distance, the flowers that are back here in this field are really small because they're so far away. So I'm just kind of dabbing with the corner of my brush, but I'm not doing it in any patterned way. There's going to be some areas that just look like masses of yellow. So every once in a while I'll turn my brush sideways and just add a little blanket of that yellow color. Anytime you get down here towards this area that's going to be foggy, I would add more white to the yellow. You can do a little texture here. I mean, you can leave some little clumps of that white and yellow. So if you'll continue doing this, you're going to have, like I said, kind of blanketed areas of little small dabs of color back here. And then intermixed among them, though, I want you to add some green and yellow. Green, yellow, and white mixed together. So a nice bright shade of green. And I want you to add just a little of that in there too, because there would be some greenery showing through. Not so much up here on top of the hill, but as we move down towards the front area of the canvas where the viewer is, there will be more of the green showing through. So I want you to switch between adding yellow dabs of color and then some of these greenery areas. And I'm gonna leave you to that while I go into the fast frame mode to add the rest of mine. And I'll be back with you. Okay, I'm pausing just for a second to tell you that as I was filling in this field, I switched to mostly green down here at the bottom, and it's green mixed with yellow still, but it's a darker green, and I did some brush strokes here along the bottom that were more vertical, kind of like grasses, because this is up close to the viewer. And if in your background area there are parts of it that you think look just a little rough to you, you could always do kind of a light wash over the area, which would be like a light color like white mixed with yellow with some water added to it, and you can just kind of smooth over some of the areas that you might think are just they just don't, look quite cohesive to you. You can just kind of make a wash over those areas. And we're going to go back and add flowers into this area, and there's also going to be fog over this area. But I just wanted to show you that kind of little trick you can do to kind of smooth out this area a little bit before we start adding individual flowers. Okay, I'm going to move on to doing the other side in fast motion. Okay, so I added more green down here to the bottom, and I wanted to mention that I did a bluish green, so I did the ultramarine mixed with the hooker's green, and I did a little bit of that darker shade of the blue green because it brings the blue from up here down to the bottom. And so now what I would do is go through and add some actual dots of yellow. When I'm using the wooden end of my brush to just kind of dot some yellow dots all through here. Now, if you're doing them back here in the distance, they're going to be very small because the flowers would be smaller back there. And you know, I don't expect you to sit here and dot every single flower. It just might be nice to have a little bit of texture with a few flowers back here. Maybe a couple back there where you can see them. And then up front here, you're gonna get bigger dabs, and you can maybe use the end of your brush to do these ones. And if you really wanna get fancy, you can actually, at the very forefront right here, you could do some petals and actually have some whole flowers that you actually paint in if you wanna take the time to do that. It's actually pretty simple, and I'll show you one. The one thing I want to mention is while you're doing these dots, make sure not to polka dot. And I mean, don't have them evenly spaced. They have to be randomly spaced. Some will be clumped up together. Some will be standing alone. So I would do that on both sides. And then if you want to do a flower up front that you can see the petals, you can first of all, I would add a little white to your paint because the yellow won't show up that well against this dark background. And then I would just do the idea of some petals with this brush, and you can do just a couple of those. I added a little too much white where you can't really see it that well. But that might be nice to have a few down there that you can see the petals. So do that on both sides where you have these dots of color. And then you can also add some other colors. Like if you want to bring that beautiful purplish shade down here, you could have some dots of that color. So that's the ultramarine mixed with white. Actually, gotta find some white here. I'm out of white in my palette. So once you get the ultramarine mixed with the white, you can add some dabs of that beautiful color there, and maybe have some clumps of it, like it's a certain kind of flower that has petals that stand up, be kind of in a cone, a vertical cone shape with some dabs like that. And I think that would be really nice to have some of that down here because it just would pull that from the top down to the bottom. So I would add some of those flowers. And then the one thing I want to leave you with, I mean, you definitely want to add more of those dabs of color, but you also want to add this foggy area, which I need some more white. The foggy area on the road. So I'm going to take a damp brush, clean, slightly damp brush, a little bit of white paint on my brush. I don't want a lot because I want it to be almost like a wash. And I'm just gonna put this wet white paint There's barely any on my brush, and I'm just brushing over this area. I don't want this opaque area that covers everything up, so that's why I'm using a damp brush with a little water added to my paint, and I'm using very little on my brush because I don't want to cover everything up. I just want it to look foggy. Okay, so that's the foggy area coming out of this bottom here, and I might just do a little more of that, and I'm gonna add all the rest of my flowers into the background, and I think we need maybe a little white highlight in the road right here, maybe a wet area. Oh, I could add a little bit of that sky blue. I think that's a great idea. Take some of the cerulean blue, add the white to it, maybe add just a little highlight here, like maybe a little waters in the road. I need a little more white added to that. I'm sorry, I keep running out of white paint. That's always my problem. I can never have enough white paint. Should get a big bottle of white paint. Well, I have to work on that some more, but you get the idea. There's going to be this cerulean blue highlight down here that is going to just bring the sky right down to the bottom of the painting and balance everything out. It's overdone right now, but I'm going to work on it and I'll fix it. And I'm going to add the flowers, and I'll see you at the end. Okay, so that's the finished painting, Blue Ridge Parkway. I would probably, spend a little more time on this. If I didn't have to wrap it up, I would probably put maybe some washes over some of the areas of the mountains that I think are a little too distinct. Like I would want these mountains that are along the top here maybe to be a little bit under a wash of white. And that's just making a watered down white and putting it over top of those, and it'll make them fade into the distance a little more. And then I did add a little wash over the road because I thought that the ruts in the road were sticking out too much. So if yours are, you can do that too. Also, maybe these trees along the ridgeline are a little bit dark. They are too much of a focal point. So I tried to draw the dark color down here on the bottom so that they would balance out, but still might lighten those up a little. But thanks for painting with me. We'll be adding another video soon, maybe within a week or so. And it really helps me if you will like and subscribe to the channel. The subscribe button is somewhere under this video. You'll see it just says subscribe, and it's free. Costs nothing to do. I just want to keep on being able to bring you these videos. So thanks for painting with me, and hope to see you soon.